Squeaky Tree Homestead has asked me to be part of a collaboration talking about how I would homestead if I was just starting to homestead in 2022. I have been homesteading since I was 18 months old, and so that's a hard question for me. I don't know what my life would be without homesteading, so instead of necessarily saying what I would do different, I don't think I would do anything different from what I'm actually doing now. Instead, I'm going to walk you through some of the skills that I have developed over the most recent years that have made my homestead more effective, cost less, and grow better food than it did when I started out as a younger person. So make sure to check out the description for links.
Hey guys, so I have been asked to do a video about if I was to start homesteading in 2022, how would I do it? And the first thing I would say is go get your food storage first. You need a year's worth of food storage as a minimum. 2 years is better. Spend your money on putting actual food into your pantry. You need the 5 basics: dry goods, fat, water, seasonings, additives, salt, and canned goods. You need those 5 things. And then on top of that, you need to get any medical supplies that your family has to have on hand. For instance, Kaya just took a little jar of Prid inside. It's something that pulls things that are stuck in your skin. It pulls them out. It creates a little pocket of infection and seals it and just pulls it out. That's called Prid. That's something we like to have a lot of on hand. The other thing we like to have on hand is, what's the salt? Epsom salts. We use Epsom salts if we get cut, if we have metal that cuts us, that kind of thing, rust. Epsom salts for infections is very important. So, before you start homesteading, spend money putting food into your mouth, because homesteading, unless you're purchasing an animal to put directly into the freezer, it's going to be a little bit of time before you're actually putting food into your home. And it's much more important right now, with inflation being what it is, to actually have food in your home before you start to think about spending a lot of money on infrastructure and on breeding stock. Okay. All right, so when I start to build my infrastructure, I use secondhand goods as much as possible. I built a little greenhouse like this after we'd been on the property for about 2 years, and it cost me $300 in lumber. This particular greenhouse that I built last year was $100, and that's because over time I learned how to use pallets. You guys are so helpful. I just you guys are so noisy. All right, we'll try it at the back of the greenhouse. So I built this greenhouse out of 100% secondhand, probably 30-year-old lumber, and a couple of cow panels. And then half of the plastic I used was from a mattress store. The only good greenhouse plastic that I used on it is what went directly over the top. Everything on the side was old mattress plastic. So another thing is, if you have a structure or something else like these milk jugs that isn't being used for one thing, that doesn't mean get rid of them. This deck is very hot in the summertime, and it was twice as big as what you see. We took lumber from that part of the deck we weren't using, and we turned it into the smokehouse where there was an open gazebo, and we put in a floor. And then we used the bottom part of the deck for baby animals that we want to keep safe from predators or from being too far away from the house for us to get to easily. I have to get a new swimming pool for my ducks every year to swim in. And every year, by the end of the season, they have a hole in the bottom. I fill those up with cardboard and wood, rabbit manure, and then a little bit of potting soil, and they're my new low raised beds. Just because it doesn't work for the initial purpose anymore doesn't mean that it doesn't work at all. I use pallets for everything. These raised beds, these are pallets, and using old gardening landscaping cloth, I stapled them to the bottom to keep my potting soil from coming out. And I made raised beds out of them. In none of these did I use new landscaping fabric. This is an old sheet. You can go to a secondhand store and buy a sheet for $1 and staple it around the base of a pallet. And these pallets are not new pallets that I paid money for. These are old secondhand nasty pallets that were already falling apart. I use my really pretty good pallets for bigger projects, not for something like this. This kind of project is only for pallets that are kind of falling apart a little bit. All right, this is welded wire, the same as those cages over there that go over the top of my raised beds. Same thing, it makes a fantastic guard around your fruit trees. Ducks, anything you water, ducks will come along and they will eat the roots in the place where you've watered. So having a cage around it means that the ducks cannot kill your fruit trees. And then putting a tire at the bottom with a cage gives you another layer of protection. Again, I do this with fencing that is no longer perfect. I want to show you what I do with old hoses. A hose that has started to crack and be less than perfect, I use it as a drip irrigator. This clip is over a big hole. See if I can find the big hole. Oh, the big hole is on the underside. I don't know how I'm going to show you that. Can you see the hole? Right there. There's the hole, see it? That has to be cut out square. It can't just be a slit. So I cut holes in them, and then a really bad hose, what I do is I cut a piece off. I cut a piece off the hose and then I slit it down the middle, and that acts as my pressure cap. That's my pressure cap for my automatic drip watering system for my trees. And it means I don't have to go buy an expensive drip system. I just use my old hoses and cut a cap from a really bad hose to keep the pressure up. All right, in the winter, I put plastic on all of my chicken coops. If your chickens are in a normal coop, the wind blows in and it takes more calories to keep warm, and so you have to feed them more if you don't keep them warm. And so we put plastic on our coops and on our runs, all of them, in the winter. Same thing for the rabbits. The rabbits go in the big greenhouse. All right, this is a hotbed. What it is to all intents and purposes is a massive compost bed. It's made out of pallets. It is just held together with twine, and I used really old greenhouse plastic on the inside. The bars on the top hold the rabbit cages up. The reason I want to talk about this is because instead of having a compost you have to turn, what I do instead is I fill this up with branches and wood and rabbit manure from the rabbits. And then I put a little bit of potting soil on the top and I just plant into my compost. Rather than turning it and worrying about that, I just leave it where it is and I build more hotbeds. Every single last bit of carbon from my house, like paper or cardboard or food scraps that doesn't go to anything else, which isn't really the case because we have pigs, but you know, before we had pigs, would go into a hotbed. They're not beautiful when they're being filled, but once they're planted, they're gorgeous. A lot of what I do is not attractive, but it's meant to keep my animals comfortable, so I can't get too proud about how it looks. So I use old feed sacks, old blankets, and old plastic hog ringed onto my cages. My cages need to be mobile because my rabbits are pooping into my hotbeds to create compost and to create soil. So I need to be able to move the rabbit cages, but I need to keep the wind off of them and also the bright sun. And so you can see we have some old mattress plastic, some old feed sacks, and it keeps the wind and it keeps the sun off of them so that I can move these from hotbed to hotbed. All right, so I plant garlic at the base of all my brambles and my fruiting plants. So there is garlic growing here in the strawberries, and there's garlic growing here at the base of the raspberries. Anywhere that I water, I plant garlic at the base, and that way I don't have to have a separate bed for garlic. I just have to go dig it up. All right, this is an electrical fence stake. I use it for everything. I put chicken wire on it, I put welded garden fencing on it, and I use it as a marker if I planted a new tree. I use it to hold up the cages around said trees. This is what I use because it's so movable and so easy, and they last forever. I probably have 200 of these, and they've lasted me for 8 years now. Anything you have that is square can be connected by hog rings. These little deely bobbers, those are hog rings. And I use them to make fences out of just about everything. These are old shelves of some kind, like college shelves that come in squares, and I make fence out of them. And anytime I see something like this at a secondhand store for cheap, I buy it. Any kind of critter cage, any kind of critter gate, fence, I buy it. And then I go home and I fix it up with hog rings. Something like this will keep ducks and chickens out of where you want them not to be. Rather than buying specialized pens, rather than building specialized pens, look for structures on your property that will work, that don't have any other use. This is the inside of our deck. We protected the window with pallets so that nothing could get to the window to hurt it. And we have a little waterproof shelter under here. It keeps them cool in the summer and warm in the winter. And we bed it down deeply with straw or hay or sawdust. But we've had pigs, baby goats, baby sheep, chickens. We've had everything in here, and it's so universal. And I didn't have to build something new. It wasn't wasted space when I turned it into critter pens. All right, this is my living fence behind me. I put this in 2012. It doesn't look like much right now, but in the summer you have leaves that come up and it's beautiful. We feed the rabbits off of this fence. We feed the goats off of this fence. It provides a windbreak. It gives the ducks somewhere cool in the summer to lay underneath. And I don't know, I think it's beautiful. This is not the only one I've built. I've built others. But if you want something free that just takes a little bit of time, sticking willows and poplars in the ground, just cuttings off of your own trees, it works great. Instead of spending massive amounts of money to put in windbreaks, you can just take a stick, put it in at the right time of year, keep it watered, and there's your windbreak. I don't know how well I can show it with this camera.
Which one?
Okay, so this is my kids' old swing set. And when we moved here, they were little enough that they could play on it quite a bit. The kids still do play on it, but we also use it to butcher our small livestock. You can see here, this is a string that we hang animals from, whether it's rabbits or chickens or ducks. It's at just the right height. It has these little hooks on it for string, and we use it to butcher the animals, small animals. So make sure to look around for your own structures, multi-purpose them. For those of you who are not carpenters, see if I can find it and show it to you. This is plumber's tape. You can make it into a hinge and you can attach things with it. This is the hinge side for the door on the greenhouse. The next thing, once again, not sure what you can see. Where's my hand? These are hog rings. I can pinch them on things and make them stay. The next thing is just a staple gun. I stapled the plastic on first and then I hold it down with lathe. This lathe will keep it from ripping in the wind. First, I tack it down with staples, little staple gun, J21. And then I take this old lathe and I screw it onto the plastic. The staples by themselves will tear out of the plastic, but the lathe sandwiches the plastic between two boards and it can't tear. So even though we get gusting wind of like 50, 60 miles an hour, and a pretty consistent wind the rest of the time, this greenhouse has not broken even though it's not professional. Okay, this is the venting in the back of the greenhouse. It's just a piece of plastic wire to keep the chickens and the ducks out, and used a staple gun to put it on. And it means that instead of needing an electric system to keep my greenhouse cool, all I'm using is just the flow through. The reason I have this at the bottom instead of the top is because cool air is at the bottom next to the ground. I want cool air going into the greenhouse. So I have a door on the front of the greenhouse that's open at the top. And then I have this open on the bottom, and it has a flap of plastic that comes over it at night, and then we put a 2x4 on top of it. I have it closed off permanently on the prevailing wind side so that the wind can't gust and get under it. And I just keep it simple. All of my greenhouses work on this principle, the principle that I want things to be cheap. This is my 6 months of food storage. This is for pigs and chickens and ducks. 6 months. We don't give them a whole lot of grain, but they do need a little bit. It's not food storage for rabbits. It has corn in it.
Oh, gotcha.
So there's my 6 months worth of food storage. I would like to get this much again for the year. These are billboards. I use billboards as tarps for my hay. I use billboards as tarps for my wood. I use them once they start to get a little bit crackly. I use them inside shelters. I use them inside hotbeds as the waterproof lining. And I get them for free. I get them for free from a local sign billboard making shop, because otherwise they have to just recycle them. They make amazing tarps. It costs like $100 to get a big enough tarp to go over a winter's worth of hay. And why spend that $100? Go get yourself some tarps. And I stock them up. I like to have like 10 on hand at a time. All right, this is another use for those banners. This is our nicest shelter. It is the warmest shelter we have, and it is the most windproof. What it is pallets. I have 3 T-posts anchoring in strategic places where I don't have a square angle. Anywhere that I have a square, I don't need a T-post. So I only have 3 T-posts in this shelter. I have 2 hog panels, and then I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 pallets that I used in this. So what it cost me was under $100 to make this shelter, because I used the plastic from a billboard. I used 7 pallets, which cost me $5 a piece. They were really nice pallets. They were delivered for that price. And then I used 2 hog panels. I think they're at $30 a piece now. So, you know, less than $100 for this whole thing. And it was fantastic to have. So there's nothing wrong with building a beautiful barn. Beautiful barns are so to be had. If you have the money, do it. If you don't have the money, something like this is way better than a flimsy shed, especially if you have to go into debt to do it. But I love this thing. We have put new plastic on it. We have 3 layers of plastic on. We started with an old tarp through the winter, and when it started to fray a little bit, we went and got and doubled up another banner and put that on. Again, we used lathe. We stapled it first, and then we put lathe on, and that lathe holds it down even in the wind. Even with terrible, terrible gusting winds, there's no problem. I don't know if you can see the babies. Hi, baby. Where are you?
She's right here on the pallet.
Okay, so anytime we have baby animals that would require milk replacer, what we do instead is we have our goats adopt them. It takes 3 days for the mom to adopt them and be willing to nurse them. And then after that, you don't have to worry about bottles, you don't have to worry about milk replacer, you don't have to worry about love even, because the goat will then give your babies love, which is as important as milk. The other thing that happens is that by having the goats out here before I plant anything, they're eating down all the weeds and keeping the weeds down until I'm ready to plant. They're putting manure on the garden. We do feed them hay. We have water and minerals for them, but we leave them just a teeny tiny bit hungry so that they'll go out and eat all the weeds. All right, this is one of my sawdust piles, and this one was free. Get your name on sawdust from your tree services. The reason for that is you can use it as bedding, you can put it in hotbeds, you can put it in paths. You can do so much with it. It hasn't been sprayed like straw or barley or other grains are currently all sprayed. So it's safe for those of you who are chemical sensitive. A lot of times tree trimming services have actual wood that is with their sawdust. Tell them that you'll take that. Make sure to put that on the note that you'll take that, because they will bring you their cut wood too. Never have a pile of firewood on anything but a pallet. Firewood in contact with the ground will rot. This was purchased firewood. We unloaded it onto a pallet. Anything that you don't want blowing around or tripping people, build a box out of pallets. This is where all of our extra wire goes. It's just held together with baling twine. IBC totes are amazing. You can turn them over and use them for a shelter, or you can put your cardboard in it for your garden. You can do so many things with IBC totes. Just make sure that they're food grade. Whatever that was in it was not a nasty pesticide or herbicide or chemical of some kind. It needs to be this. Ours had molasses in them. This is how I brace my firewood storage. You see that? You take and make a triangle. Attach it here, attach it here, attach it here, and it creates a triangle and a brace for your firewood. To keep stakes nice and organized, take some welded wire fencing and make a circle, and then attach it to a building with your plumber's tape so that it can't come down. And there's a storage device for your stakes. All right, once again, I don't store any hay that is not on a pallet. Any hay in contact with the ground will rot. It will become dirt. It will come in contact with worms. It will rot. You'll lose your whole bottom layer of hay if you don't have it on a pallet. I can't see if you can see it. Okay, in order to tie down a billboard or any kind of tarp securely, you put a small rock inside of it. You loop the baling twine around it and tie it off really good. This is a rock. And then I tie it to the pallet. And that means the wind can't blow it away or tear up your tarp. Okay, our grain is on a pallet to keep it off the wet dirt, because the grain will soak up water from the ground. And then we tie it at the top. And the reason we do it this way is because you can take a tote and they can load it into a pickup, but how are you going to get it out off of the pickup? So what we do is we tie an empty tote open, like you can see, and then we back the pickup up and we bucket brigade the grain out of the back of the pickup into the empty tote that's on the pallet and fill it all the way up, and then there we go. We have our storage because it's protected, and we keep it tied up so that it holds its shape. This is a hay chicks hay net, and it saves me a lot of money from not having wasted hay when I actually use it. In the winter, I don't use it as much because our winters are so cold that I want to make sure that the goats have more than they can eat. But once we get into this time of year when the goats are grazing a little bit, I put it in a hay net and make it a little harder. They have to work a little harder for their hay because there's other things out there they could be eating. Huh, Mama? I save everything. This is old hose from what we set up for drip systems in our whole property. And instead of throwing things away, as I was cutting them into different sizes, instead I just found a convenient spot where nobody was going to trip on them, and I saved it. And I've used it for a lot of different things that were not water related. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is old fence wire. Looks like I need to come and actually bend it down a little. This is to keep the ducks from going through and getting into the goats' water. The ducks have plenty of space on their own. There's no need for them to be in the goats' pasture or in their water trough. So, because I had saved all of our little tiny pieces of fencing and welded wire and all that, we have been able to, without any more cost, fix a significant length of fencing These babies might be able to get through it, our little goat babies. I think by the time they figure out how to squeeze through it, they'll be too big to squeeze through it. So there's also that. Certain trees are really, really good at reproducing themselves. Mulberry's one of those. You can cut sticks off mulberries and put them in potting soil and they will leaf out and grow roots. And everything likes to eat mulberries. Goats like to eat mulberries, rabbits like to eat mulberries, everything. And not just, I'm not talking about the fruit, I'm talking about like the branches and the leaves. Another one that likes to do that is poplar. This is a hybrid poplar. You can cut the sticks off in the spring, stick them in the ground, and they'll grow a new poplar. All the trees in my front of my property that are poplars were from that. These two I planted and now I harvest off of them. I feed their leaves and their branches to the goats in the growing season, and it just works really well. Always say yes when your neighbors offer you something. This is an old dog house. My neighbor brought it over with the tractor, gave it to me. I use it as a duck coop now. I just had to add a door, which I did with plumber's tape and hog rings. Works very well. We've never had a predator get in here. It's fantastic for winter. So we have this one, two, three. 3 of our 5 coops came from neighbors who just didn't want them anymore. So when I knew that I needed a big greenhouse, and I knew it was going to cost like $2,500 for this greenhouse, what I did is I got on social media and I put together a Kickstarter, and I made knitted items and I made ebooks about what I do to pay for my Kickstarter. Mostly what I made was sweaters. It took me, I don't remember how long it took me. It took me a very long time to get those sweaters knit. So thank you for all of you who helped me with that Kickstarter. That was back in 2015. So I got this in 2015, and that's how I paid for it. I got really original. I thought through things. I got on social media. I did a Kickstarter. I made everybody knitted goods, and it was a lot of work, but I had no other way to pay for this. It's really foolish to put homesteading items on a credit card because it takes a very long time for them to pay you back. Multi-purpose every structure. This is my hotbed in the middle of my greenhouse, and in winter time the rabbits are in their cages on the top to keep them warm, and to also fill the hotbed back up again so I can plant into it. You can see my milk jugs, and again I do have electricity that could be used out here. I don't use it. Instead we use natural airflow. We have a hole at the bottom of the back that is lifted or put down, and then we leave the door open, and it works pretty well. All right, so I have a watering system. You can see the hose going through there at the bottom, right there. I have all the hotbeds set up with soaker hoses and hoses that run to it. We have 4-way and 2-way on-off knobs so that I just turn the pump on and every single hotbed gets watered at the same time. Saves me so much time. 15 minutes to water everything that I have going in the early spring. All right, this is what the swimming pools look like when they are full of rabbit compost and wood. I use a lot of wood filler, and then rabbit compost on top of that, and then a little potting soil. And this is what they look like in spring before I planted them. And this one was not covered, and you can see that the ducks got into it and actually ate some of the dirt, looking for worms, because these do develop a nice habitat for earthworms. Can't see what I can't. Darn it, I just can't see. What is it that I'm looking at? Oh, it is there. I put my duck and my goose ponds where I need my fruit trees to be more watered. Anywhere that I have something that is drought intolerant, that I'll put the pond next to it so that when we dump out the dirty water, it gets watered really well. And then we just move the pond down as we need to. Having geese and ducks in your orchard means that they will eat the grass. They'll keep the grass down without any chemicals, and then they'll poop underneath your fruit trees, which means that it'll fertilize your trees. When my orchards start to really take off was when I put ducks and geese under them so that it created a habitat. All right, everybody has stakes in random places around their garden and around their orchard. The reason I had these was because I had a fence around my fruit tree when it was small. And so I have these stakes that if I needed to put the fence back up again, I could. However, these are a little sharp. So what I do is I take an old pop bottle. John drinks a lot of pop. And so I put a pop bottle on it so that when my kids are out here playing, they can't poke their eye out or hurt themselves on these stakes. So every stake that I have that's like this on my property has a pop bottle on it.